Welcome to the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis. Join hosts Aaron Smith and Jimmy Young as they dive into the pulse of the cannabis industry, featuring weekly guests who break down big topics like standardization, evolving regulations, and exclusive member spotlights. Get informed, get inspired. And now, here are your hosts, Aaron and Jimmy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis podcast. This is episode 12 out of the run that we're looking forward to having as we move forward. I am Jimmy Young, the founder and the co-founder of WPCMTV.com and WPCM TV's production services. And we should also mention that this program is supported by Buds Group, our presenting sponsor, a consulting group out of the tri-state area of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, as well as the Maverick Public Relations Group out of Colorado. Joining me on this podcast on a fairly regular basis is our friend, the executive director of the NCIA, Aaron Smith. Aaron, always good to see you, sir.
Great to be here, as always.
And we want to welcome in a friend of the NCIA and someone who's in the trenches, as it were, Michelle Rutter Friberg is with us. She is the Director of Government Relations for the NCIA. Michelle, thank you for joining us here today as well.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So the big question is, guys, what's the latest on federal cannabis reform? Are we ever going to see rescheduling? We went from a green rush to a green wall, and the green wall pretty much was in place as soon as the administrations changed hands, as it were, at the beginning of this the calendar year. So, Aaron, what is the latest on the federal cannabis reform movement at this time?
Well, this is a long game, and anybody who's been in the cannabis space understands it. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and that's how the rescheduling process has been, which has been on ice since the new administration took over. NCIA was, really proud to be involved in the ALJ's hearings that were taking place under the last administration. I'll note that we are recording this on Friday, the 18th of July. But by the time listeners listen, we should have a new DEA administrator confirmed, and I am hopeful that will it sounds like this a good chance that this will kind of expedite this process again. And NCIA will be asking the administration to get this back on track in an expeditious way, and I think it's a real opportunity for the industry to see some progress, because rescheduling, remember, doesn't require congressional action. This can happen at the administrative level, which just provides a lot more latitude and ability to move quickly. And there are some threats in Congress to try to undermine that process. And I'll let Michelle speak to that and our work around defending against those threats.
Right, Michelle. Before you go, what Aaron discussed about 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or was it 1 step forward and 2 steps back? I call that cannabis standard time. Okay. And it wasn't just this current administration. Okay. I actually came up with that term based on what was going on with the previous administration. So I just want to throw that out there. And now, Michelle, you can give us your spin on what's going on.
Well, certainly. And I appreciate that. And like Aaron said, we are playing the long game here. And NCIA is proud to have been involved in this movement for well over a decade. I think we're actually celebrating our 15th year anniversary this year. So again, happy to do so and represent all of our members and small businesses across the country. But as Aaron alluded to, and you as well, Jimmy, there's certainly a lot of things that I'm monitoring here in DC as it relates to rescheduling and that process. But that being said, unfortunately, there's not too much in terms of concrete updates, as is so wont to happen out of this town. But are certainly a few things that I do want to highlight for people. So first and foremost, like Aaron mentioned, the rescheduling process has been put on pause for the last couple of months due to an interlocutory appeal that some of the designated participants brought forth at the beginning of the year. So that is a long legal way of saying that, like Aaron mentioned, things have been on ice, put on pause indefinitely for the time being. But that being said, about 2 weeks, 10 days ago or so, there was an update sent to Administrative Law Judge Mulroney, who was overseeing this process previously, from the DEA that essentially said exactly what I just did, which is no news, really. We're still hitting pause on this, and we'll let you know when that changes. That being said, we are starting to see some things break loose here. As Aaron mentioned, on Monday, the 21st, had to look at my calendar over there, in the evening of Monday, July the 21st, again, you might might be listening to this after the fact, but we are anticipating a vote to be before the entire Senate that is looking to confirm a gentleman by the name of Terry Cole to become the DEA administrator. He was nominated back about 4 months ago, and the Senate went through its process. The Senate Judiciary Committee held their confirmation hearings at that stage, pushed the nominee Cole forward. And again, we're expecting the full Senate to vote on his confirmation Monday evening. We are anticipating that nomination to move forward and for him to be confirmed by the Senate. And so, again, by the time you're listening to this, will likely have a new DEA administrator in office. During Mr. Cole's confirmation hearings, his topic, marijuana policy, did come up a number of different times. Some of the things he said were that he wanted to follow the science on this. We agree. We believe that the science is on our side and certainly support him doing so. But he also, has previously voiced concerns in the past about the dangers of marijuana. Prior to his nomination, had said things during his time in law enforcement, potentially linking marijuana to suicide risk, et cetera. And again, we believe that the science will show him something different to that. But again, this is certainly something that we are monitoring. NCIA is in the process of, we've been waiting for this nomination to happen, but we are excited to offer ourselves up as a resource to Mr. Cole and to that agency as they, relook at this process, see if it's something that they'd like to restart. But again, as Aaron alluded to, it's important to remember that the rescheduling process, the reclassification of marijuana, whether we're looking at Schedule 3 or descheduling marijuana, as we believe it should be, but that again, this is also within the purview of Congress. So to shift gears a little bit in terms of talking about rescheduling, but again, under that purview of Congress, I do want to highlight for folks that something that has been getting a lot of action in the halls of Congress lately has been the appropriations process or the budget process, which is fully underway here in DC. The reason I want to bring that up is because this budget process is a very complex, intricate issue. There's 12 different various packages that have to move in both the House and the Senate. So it can get confusing quickly, but I'm going to try to do my best to keep this as simple as I can while answering all the questions that I know folks have about this. But earlier this week, or last week, depending on when you're listening to this, one of the House Appropriations subcommittees was marking up or redlining, editing, if you will, their portion of the budget bill. We are very concerned by a provision that was included in this year's Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee bill that essentially says that the Department of Justice cannot use any of its federally appropriated funds to implement rescheduling. So let me break that down for people. What it means is that if this provision was to become law, which again, it has not become law yet, it still has a long way to go. We can talk about that in a moment if we want to, but without getting ahead of ourselves, provision is not in law yet, but it's saying that if it were to become law, that the Department of Justice cannot use any money to reschedule marijuana. So even, and again, this is all looking down a very long chain of events that has not happened yet deep into the crystal ball. But, that does mean that we could be living in a world in which, potentially the rescheduling process gets moving again, whether that is through the administration, the new administrator, or through Congress. But if this appropriations language is passed and placed into law, it means that all of that could be potentially moot. And so that is something that we are monitoring at NCIA very, very closely and trying to make sure that that language is not included in the Senate version of the bill, so that we don't have to worry about dealing with that as the negotiations continue. So again, a lot of moving parts here in terms of rescheduling. But again, the White House has certainly been having some conversations. We've seen reports about folks at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue meeting with various different agencies to talk about this policy. But again, it's sort of a bit unclear in terms of what's actually going to happen next. But again, we're happy to serve our members and this industry and continue to monitor that and make sure that cannabis has a seat at the table.
That's right. And what happens next in this administration depends on what phase the moon is in, because it does seem to move on a somewhat irregular way. Let's just leave it at that. That being said, we're talking about putting a prohibitionist named Terry Cole at the head of the DEA, who was on record. I mean, even at that hearing, he wouldn't say one way or another. He basically said, it's going to be a priority. I'm going to be looking at the science and let the science dictate. That didn't fill me with a lot of confidence, that answer. And some of the senators got their backsides up a little bit too and started to grill him. Aaron, are you comfortable with him running the DEA?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to point out that there's nobody that really in the country that is likely to ever be appointed for that role that's going to be a champion for cannabis reform. I mean, that's the reality we face. We're up against, a century of prohibition. So I think that it's worth noting that, what's been shown in this administration more than and maybe every administration, but definitely this one more than usual, is that every appointee has to be in lockstep with the president and carry out the president's will, the president's policy agenda, which the president has been very clear through the years and through the campaign that he supports not just rescheduling, but even beyond that, states' rights to enact their own laws around adult use. And I would expect the administrator to uphold that policy as the official policy of the White House.
And Michelle, I've said this before, and I don't know if you've heard it, but to me, the thing that drives our new President Trump is that it's his ego that drives a lot of this. And when his approval rating starts falling, he may need a domestic policy change, if you will, that will improve his approval ratings. And the Pew Research group came out a week ago basically saying that 88% of Americans want to see the plant decriminalized. And that's a huge number. And if he wants to be hero for that, I'm all for it. You know what I'm saying? Do you think that theory of mine about ego driving his decisions have anything to do with this? Can that help?
I certainly don't think a factor like that harms us in any way, but I also believe that, by that same logic, that is, can be very fickle, I suppose, is what I'm saying. And so again, but I think what it comes down to, Jimmy, is getting back to your initial statement, is that this policy, these reforms that we've been advocating for well over a decade, have been incredibly popular in terms of public opinion for a long, long time. The Pew Research poll that just came out recently is just another, public opinion poll and a long line of public opinion polls that shows increasing support for our issues. So, if the question is this a, very popular topic among voters, I think that we do know, and we have known for a long time, that the answer is yes to that. But, I certainly do not portend or, say to act like I know what's going on in the president's head at all times. But, certainly could see a world in which, you're looking for a boost in the polls at a time when some policies are unpopular, whether that's around, the Epstein files or immigration policy or, what have you, whatever the topic of the day may be. I certainly think that I know it's in the back of their mind. And again, I think that's illustrated by the fact that they are still continuing to engage on this issue with folks.
Right. And you mentioned immigration. Immediately comes to mind what happened in California a week ago with the raid of Grow House Farms, a produce farm that also grew cannabis. And the ICE officials went there and they arrested quite a few people. There was a protest, there was confrontations. Unfortunately, there was a tragic death involved. I guess my question to you guys, because you know better than I do on this, was Grow House Farms targeted by ICE because they were a cannabis farm, or just because they knew they had a bunch of workers in their fields for their regular farming industry, if you will? Go ahead.
First, I think it's really, first, it's just we really acknowledge the tragedy, the personal tragedy with farm worker Jaime Garcia, who was who was killed in this what seems to be a very militarized ICE raid against a legal or a state licensed business. That said, it's very unfortunate to be hearing these kinds of allegations around child labor. Certainly, undocumented workers working there, and look forward to seeing the results of the investigation around that. But mostly want to make sure that there's an investigation to ensure that sort of injury and death doesn't happen, whether it be in cannabis or in any other industry. That's completely unacceptable. As far as whether they're being targeted for being cannabis businesses, I tend to think not. I think that that businesses in California are being targeted in general. And the White House said, well, they're going to ease up on the food supply chain, but cannabis doesn't fall into that category, obviously. So, I think that there's probably some politics around this. I don't think it's anti-cannabis politics, though. That said.
Okay, and I'm just checking the name. I don't think his last name was Garcia. I think it was Jaime Elenis, and I think that is the name of the guy. Jaime Elenis Garcia. We're both right, Aaron. Okay, and I should have remembered the Garcia thing because I'm a Grateful Dead guy. Anyway, Michelle, I got to ask you about how our government works because it fascinates me because I'm learning all these things on a regular basis. Getting one bill passed is very rare. From what I understand, it's more about, hey, we have to pass the spending bill. We have to pass the budget bill. What are the amendments that we can jump onto that and get some other things done? That's how our government works, isn't it, Michelle? And you are muted right now. I want to make sure you take yourself off.
Sure. No, I'm here still. That is not a unfair representation, but groups like NCIA and certainly myself as a lobbyist here, I am always looking for any and every avenue that I can in order to push reform forward. So like you said, Jimmy, whether that is things like, quote unquote, must pass bills, which means they got to do it or, either funding runs out or, we're in trouble. But, things like the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act that has to be passed by the end of every year. Things like appropriations bills, which do come with a cutoff and, have to be annually renewed. But again, have typically in years past been considered must pass legislation. We don't have to get into what continuing resolutions and CRs are right this second. We can save that for another podcast. But, that's all to say that there are pieces of legislation that are moving and that we are exploring as avenues, again, to attach reform to. But certainly it is accurate of you to say that, passing standalone legislation is a heavy lift right now. And we've certainly seen that in years past, but do want to remind everybody that, bills like the Safe Banking Act were passed standalone multiple times throughout previous sessions of Congress. So it's certainly not unheard of and something that we're hoping to do by the end of the 119th Congress again. But as folks know, legislators here in DC have been very, very busy. Again, we're recording this just ahead of August recess. So what does that mean to normal people, not all of us who are here in Washington, DC and lives revolve around Congress? August recess is the term for the month of August when legislators, member of Congress, go home for the month and get a break and get to meet with constituents, tour various facilities back home. So I guess that's a good moment for me to tell folks as well that if you, you're at home, you would like to show your facility, your store, your cultivation, process, whatever that may be, to legislators to further legitimize and destigmatize our industry. We certainly encourage you to do that. You can reach out to your local trade association, groups like NCIA, or to your legislators directly to schedule things like that for when they're back at home. But, the legislative calendar is ticking. We are waiting to see bills like the Safe Banking Act to be reintroduced, as well as some other ones. And again, we're hoping that now that we have, that Congress has dealt with various larger packages like rescissions and reconciliation, we can focus more on some of our priorities.
And one of the priorities actually seems to be moving in the right direction. They've been talking about getting access to medical marijuana for our veterans through the VA hospitals. It does seem to be moving forward finally. It was tied to a defense must-pass bill, right? Isn't that how that worked, Aaron? This is something that is a long time coming, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I don't think there's probably nobody in the country thinks that somebody who is injured or suffering from PTSD because they fought for our country should not have access to medicinal cannabis. So we're very optimistic that this will finally become part of the law and provide relief to thousands of vets in the country. And Michelle, maybe you can kind of outline the past, how we got to where we are, and what's next for the VA legislation.
Certainly, Aaron, and echo all the sentiments that you just laid out here, but do want to be clear with folks that the fight on this is not over yet, and it is not a done deal. This language was passed out of committee at both the House and Senate level, so that means that under regular order, how things are supposed to operate in terms of the legislative process, that it's in the House version, it's in the Senate version, we're all happy, it gets passed into law, right? Unfortunately, that is not what we have seen in years past. This this language was actually attached via an appropriations bill. So first and foremost, it's important to mention that because that means that, even, and we do hope that this language gets put into law, but, even in that event that this does get enshrined in law, this has to be renewed annually. So the fight will continue until this is kind of considered a regular order. And the other thing with this is that we've actually seen this amendment language be attached to both House and Senate appropriations bills at least 10 different times. And I'm not exaggerating. That is not a number I just picked randomly because 10 is a nice round number. I actually mean no less than 10 times. We've even had it, again, like we do right now, that it's gone through both the House and the Senate and been stripped out in backdoor and backroom negotiations at the last second. So all that is to say that this seems like common sense to all of us. We all believe that this is the right policy moving forward. This is actually even just allowing veterans to talk to their VA doctors about this. This isn't even about actually accessing. This is even just about talking to your physician about it. So I encourage people that if you are interested in learning more on this, to get in touch again with your local organizations and to make sure your member of Congress knows that this is something that matters to you and that you believe should be put into law. And so we want to keep that pressure on.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And another final topic here about the states, what's going on in the various states out there. There is some movement in Nebraska and even in Alabama that have had years to work on their medical rollout, and it does seem to be moving forward with that. And it does look like now that there's a new bill in the Pennsylvania House and Senate moving forward, a bipartisan bill to introduce adult use at that level too. So the race to be the 25th state continues, Aaron, but all signs do point towards Pennsylvania as perhaps being the closest one because the governor's on board with this and he's just waiting for the right kind of bill to hit his desk.
Yeah, that's really exciting because I think this is probably one of the bigger states that is in play, meaning that's going to be, more members of Congress, more, a larger number of members of the House delegation that represent a legal state. It's a swing state. So it has a lot of political influence as a state, being purple, and so there have been some in the state that have pushed for what I would think less than ideal policies. One of which would be state-run stores, which is an unworkable solution. I think state-run alcohol stores are kind of becoming a thing of the past, so it wouldn't make sense to try to get the state government in the cannabis industry. But I'm happy to see that I think some sanity is prevailing around that issue as well. And hopefully see the 25th state and a huge state come on board very soon here.
I have to correct you guys, a huge commonwealth. As a native Virginian and as a family who is from Pennsylvania, those are the commonwealth.
And I'm from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts too, so I recognize the difference here. Okay, I swear I do. And yes, and good for you to point that out too, Michelle. Last thoughts about the future here in the next 6 months. You mentioned that our Congress tends to go on vacation in August. It's as someone who hasn't enjoyed a vacation in quite a few years, I don't understand why these guys and gals, women, get to take a break, because it seems like the only time they do work is when they're on deadline and they have all these big bills to pass, and then they all get together and they work all night. Why don't they just work more? I don't know. I'm a little frustrated as an outspoken guy from Massachusetts, I guess, on this one. In the next 6 months, crystal ball, Aaron, are we going to see something positive come out of Washington, D.C.? Yes or no? If you had to pick yes or no, is it yes or no?
I'm gonna err on the side of optimism and say yes. I think there's a lot in motion right now. There's some threats out there, but we also have the rescheduling issue under review on the administration side, and I think all signs point to positivity here, but no promises. What's important is that the industry continue to invest in the advocacy that's going to make it possible for us to see some positive change. This change doesn't just happen by itself. It happens because of literally decades and millions upon millions of dollars that have been poured into an advocacy movement that got us this far. But like we said at the top of the show, it's a long game. And it's going to be very important that the industry invest in organizations like NCIA, if they're not doing their own lobbying, because otherwise this issue falls by the wayside.
Squeaky wheel, right, Michelle? Squeaky wheel.
Absolutely. And Aaron, I'm mad at you because you took most of the words right out of my mouth there. So thanks for that, stealing my closing lines. But, the last thing that I would say to folks as well is to remember that reform is not a foregone conclusion, and that it does not happen when we stay on the sidelines. And so again, certainly understand that support comes in various different forms and ways. It doesn't always mean monetary or financial, although it's important for people to remember that both the organizations doing the work need financial support, but also so do members of Congress. I don't think it'll come as a surprise to anybody here that this town, Washington, D.C., money talks. People always say pay to play, quid pro quo, however you want to do it and say it, regardless. But that again, reform is not a foregone conclusion. It takes form in many different ways in terms of investing in associations like ours, in terms of ensuring that we have a comprehensive strategy for moving forward, et cetera. And certainly at a time when folks are frustrated with what's going on or what isn't going on from policymakers and folks in Washington, I am a lobbyist. I work in this industry, in this space, but I'm an American citizen too. And so I certainly understand that frustration. But I would just remind everybody that we are on the right side of history, to keep up the good fight and to remember that you're not alone in this and that we are stronger together.
Absolutely, 100%. And perfect way to end this thing, Michelle. That was the way. We are in a historic time. And I loved being part of a movement like this. First time in my life that I can actually say that. And I appreciate all the support that the NCIA gives to the industry and to this program as well. And we want to thank our sponsors, Buds Group, the consulting group out of the tri-state area of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And of course, the Maverick Public Relations Group out of Colorado. So for Aaron Smith and Michelle Rutter Friberg, I am Jimmy Young. Thank you again for listening and watching the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis podcast. And remember to like, share, subscribe, and support.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
Welcome to the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis. Join hosts Aaron Smith and Jimmy Young as they dive into the pulse of the cannabis industry.
We look forward to the introduction of the Safe Banking Act in this Congress, and we will be doing everything we can to rally support around that.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important. Being on the Hill was great.
Featuring weekly guests who break down big topics like standardization, evolving regulations, and exclusive member spotlights.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.